and be there now.
Welcome everyone to Models That Matter. I'm Tamar Spielberg and I'm thrilled to be here today alongside Linda, Jen, and Lacey. Together, we will explore some of the most influential models of clinical supervision, examining how they shape our practice, support supervisees' growth, and ultimately enhance client care. Each of us will bring our own perspective and experience to the conversation. So think of this as lively collaborative talk show where theory meets practice. Let's dive into models that matters. First, I would like to introduce my esteemed colleagues. Linda Storm. Linda Storm is a Canadian certified counselor, business solution architect, and a doctoral student at Yorkville University. She brings a neo-psychodynamic and parts-informed approach to her private practice, where she supports neurodivergent adults with trauma, anxiety, and identity development. As the president of the CCPA Private Practitioners Chapters, Linda is passionate about preparing the next generation of counselors and advancing ethical supervision practices for those interested in private practice. Before her counseling career, Linda spent over 20 plus years with IBM, contributing to the skill transfer of deep blue technology and exploring the early frontier of artificial intelligence. This unique blend of clinical expertise and technological innovation shapes her unique perspective on the future of counseling and supervision in Canada. Welcome, Linda. Next, Jen Russo. Jen Russo is a certified Canadian counselor, private practice therapist specializing in child trauma and a DCP student. She utilizes the adaptive information processing model to employ EMDR and trauma resolution. Jen has completed the certificate program Progressive Counting and EMDR training at the Child Trauma Institute in, Northampton, Massachusetts, under the guidance of Dr. Ricky Greenwald. She went on to study with Kaya Day in Costa Rica to obtain the clinical hypnotherapy for trauma and the Master Clinical Counseling Hypnotherapy designation. Jen started out providing direct service work in a maximum security facility for youth, assessment and receiving home for men with schizophrenia, and mental health proctor, as well as a child protection worker in 4 provinces since 1989. Welcome, Jen. Lacey Runner is the Health and Wellness Service Director for the Tsuut'ina Nation. When requested, she provides mental health support through equine therapy to Treaty 7 and 8 Nation. She draws she draws from her Dene Schwepnik heritage cultural practices to incorporate a hybrid practice model when supporting individuals in their healing journey. Lacey is also a trainer and a facilitator for the Crisis and Trauma Resource Institute, delivering meaningful information to organizations and Indigenous communities across Canada. Lacey holds a Master of Counseling Psychology in a Canadian certified counselor, holds a Bachelor of Art degree in Criminal Justice with a minor in Indigenous Studies, and is also a PhD candidate with Yorkville University for the Counseling Psychotherapy Doctoral Program. Through education and life experience, she acquires the necessary skill to support individuals with diverse mental health needs, while also specializing in equine therapy for children and youth. She believes in spreading awareness of education, trauma-informed practices to break down colonial system and believe and support all individuals from diverse backgrounds with a compassionate and empathetic approach. Thank you, Lacey. Myself, I am a graduate of Concordia University in 1993 with an honor bachelor degree in psychology. I continued my academic journey and completed a master's degree in social work at Yeshiva University in New York City. I am a registered member of the College of Social Worker and Social Service Worker and maintain a membership with the Association of Social Workers. I am in private practice and a doctoral student at Yorkville University. I began my career at the Children's Aid Society when I worked for 18 years as a child protection investigator. I later served as a school social worker for 7 years before establishing my own private practice in 2006, where I continue to work today. Trained in cognitive behavioral therapy and mindfulness practices, I integrate evidence-based and holistic approach into my work. Throughout my career, I have gained extensive experience working in both closed communities and multicultural settings, providing my clients with compassionate, culturally responsive, and effective care. So let's start with our first caller for today. So the first caller for today asked, what are some of the key models of supervision we use in Canada today? Linda?
Oh, thank you, Tamar, for that question. I'm going to emphasize, first of all, in Canada, because a lot of what we study, a lot of what we read, research articles, textbooks, conversations as Canadians, what makes us different from other people, our multiculturalism and our emphasis on, protecting the interests of people that go deep into our histories, like our Indigenous groups and everything. And those are at the forefront and now rising and becoming very pervasive in how we work as therapists, as it should be. For the rest of the question, as a supervisee, first of all, I have experienced more than one supervision model throughout my therapy practice, of course, because we start there. And the whole concept of supervision is that we stay there and we make it a lifelong opportunity to experience supervision. It's not something we do at the beginning and then we forget, right? So at the beginning, I didn't recognize the models, but as a result of doing a deep dive and having access to your thoughts and your experiences, even in this course, I can now look back and remember, for example, to name some of them that I used to experience. I didn't realize I was experiencing at the time. For example, the developmental model, as described by the work of Borders and Brown, emphasizes supervisees movement through clearly defined stages, supporting their evolving competencies over time. That's exactly what I experienced now that I went, I go back and I revisit those moments. Integrative models, which were articulated by our studies and our knowledge of Shelton and Zeraino, also are standard. Bringing together different theoretical orientations and allowing supervisors to adapt their approach to the specific needs of us as supervisees. I didn't realize this at the time. It was very transparent because I had very talented supervisors. Now I look back at it and I go, it's exactly what they were doing. So these structures and these frameworks are very, very important. As an up-and-coming supervisor or continuing to refine my supervisor skills, I now lean myself towards competency-based approaches, which are gaining traction as well, because this is also the competency-based education system that we're currently experiencing right now. So competency-based approaches, which are gaining traction as well, especially for ensuring the ethical and practices in diverse settings. as opposed to the discrimination model, which is described beautifully by Bernard, is a landmark framework as well, enabling supervisors to be flexible, to move between roles of teacher, counselor, consultant on what the supervisee requires at any given time. What makes these models particularly meaningful in the Canadian context is how they connect to our values exclusively: cultural responsiveness, the professional accountability that we're held to. Supervision is not just about developing technical skills, it's also about preparing the counselors who work under us as supervisees to respond to the complex realities of practice as they present themselves here in Canada as our communities grow through immigration or by going back and supporting neurodivergent adults, as I do, and adapting to new challenges in our field. These models offer the structure, but they also offer the supervisors to integrate our own clinical wisdoms and affirm the unique strengths of each practitioner as we move through the system, which brings into the supervisory relationship a very similar model to that we're developing with our clients, which is that therapeutic relationship, to make it effective across the varied landscapes of the Canadian counseling practice, which is specific to us. And if anybody has any other questions, otherwise, I pass it on to the next therapist question. Tamar, back to you.
Thank you, Linda. That was a very informative answer that can give our viewers foundation to our topic today. Thank you so much. Very thorough. Thank you. For our second question, our caller asked, the 2020 handbook dives deeper into theories and common formats. How do these connect to our practice? Lacey, can you take this one?
Hi, Tara. Thank you. This is a very insightful question from the caller, and I will definitely speak from personal practice within my current line of work, especially within working with an Indigenous community, because I feel that having the 2020 Canadian Counseling Psychotherapy Handbook really serves as an essential bridge between theoretical knowledge and practical application when providing mental health support. And the one thing that I found as an individual living in two separate worlds, walking in two separate paths, is that from an Indigenous perspective, we're so used to a certain way due to colonial and assimilation practices and doing what needs to be done. But then coming in as an individual that's from the community, that has the only mental health background within the community, trying to establish the standards of practice, there's a lot of challenges that are met. But then really highlighting the importance and like how vital this handbook can be is it's definitely a resource for myself, because what I often find too, that being one of the only therapists that are from the community, is that I'm put in a lot of positions where it could really impact my ethics, you know, my personal values and what I'm having to do, but also meeting the individuals where they're at. But again, I really need to follow this handbook, because how I see it is a personal skeleton or framework in guiding my practice. And that's the great thing about this handbook, is that it's a handbook to establish a framework for a lot of us as therapists. But we also have that opportunity, especially within today's practice, to be innovative and creative to help those in those moments. And that is the great thing about psychotherapy today compared to 60 years ago. For example, the handbook is very informative in providing guidelines, the well-being of clients. What are we supposed to do when dual relationships happen? The duty to warn, sexual contacts with clients, and how to support mandated clients. Because again, within my line of work and with working with Indigenous community, those professional lines, especially when it comes to dual relationships, often get crossed. And that's where, as for myself, I'm referring to my handbook, but then I'm also practicing consultation with others. And the one thing that I often hear is like, well, will it do more harm than good? So it's like, and that's the great thing about the handbook is having that consultation and the supervision. And as counselor and therapists, we prioritize integrity and well-being of our clients. We're recognizing each person as a unique individual with distinct experiences and needs. Again, compared to like 60 years ago, things are a bit different within this line of field, but with the handbook, it has expanded so much to develop and focus on a collaborative relationship with clients, meeting them where they're at and really understanding their unique and diverse needs and background. And we're not practicing from a one-size-fits-all approach anymore. So, which is really exciting, being a therapist in today's day and age. We often recognize that our clients may have intentions or capabilities to put others at significant immediate risk, and that we are obligated to act with care and diligence. And again, this is another common challenge when working with an Indigenous community, that duty to warn. Because often enough, even working within the schools, I hear that, do we want to call CFS? Do we want to call the police? Because again, due to colonial assimilation practices with these two governing bodies, it continues to do a lot of more harm than good. So again, being able to use that discretion, but also consultation with our peers, other professionals, it allows us to utilize those steps first before really going into intervention steps, because like we see it today within the current child welfare system and within the RCMP, there are still ongoing challenges where Indigenous peoples don't trust those interventions. So it is up to us to really have this handbook guide us to make the best decisions possible. And I know there was those times where I had no choice but to call the police, because how I saw it, I would rather have my client be very upset with me for months, but knowing they're still here and alive. So again, it can be very, it's tough to be a therapist, but again, having this handbook provides so much support and helping us guide to make those ethical decisions for the well-being of our clients. The handbook underscores the importance of ethical practice, again, by connecting theory to real-life dilemmas to advocate for the client. Having that person-centered approach is really great. It allows that for the informed consent to involve a fostering therapeutic environment where clients feel respected, they feel heard, they feel empowered to make those choices, rather than being presented with a label or a legal document or papers that it's just too hard to understand. For example, with Indigenous communities, because again, this is where I primarily work and what I can speak on, we were often told that this is what we are. We're so used to that. So now that it's really practicing from a client-centered approach and a trauma-informed framework, we're empowering our clients, like, what can I do for you? Instead of like, well, this is what you need. We're moving away from that. So and that's the great thing about how when we can apply, the background theory, but also use our discretion to make the best support and suggestions for our clientele. It encourages us to, again, to tailor our interventions to be culturally responsive, such as integrating Indigenous healing practices alongside Western method approaches. So again, that two-wide lens approach is really great when working with an Indigenous population, because to be honest, when I was done my master's, a few of us peers were just like, yeah, I think we're throwing a lot of this out the door because again, we had our values, we had our beliefs. It's like, this is how we think or how we truly believe to support individuals. And whether it's through dance, it's through like different practices of culture, because not everyone wants to practice a certain way. For example, I work with a lot of Indigenous youth, and some still don't know their culture, so they don't feel comfortable with it. So they'd rather go with the Western route, which is, again, that's their decision, and which is our job to honor that, what they want, because we cannot tell them what they need when they know themselves best. We're just there to help guide the process, to help that awareness. And that's what this handbook does. It allows us to make sure that we're guiding that process for our clientele to trust the process. With us leading them, sometimes we have to give them a little push. Sometimes we walk beside them, but we're always there with them. And it's really often provides that role of reflexivity in counseling, you know, urging us to be thoughtful in our examination with our own biases, you know, because again, as therapists, we're constantly learning. We're constantly having to be up to date with evidence-based practices. And I'm glad the handbook really highlights that, because within this field, it's always evolving with current events, with new evidence-based practices. You know, like today, like there's psychedelic therapy, there's animal therapy, there's art therapy, dance therapy, like so much has expanded. And it's nice that there's that requirement for us to continue with those continuation credits so that we are practicing from an up-to-date lens. It allows us to be open-minded, because again, what I often find when working with other individuals who've been in the field for quite some time, who still believe in a certain practice, it becomes very challenging. So again, it allows us to kind of like a forced, but and a way to encourage us to continue with that professional development, because again, it's our job to ensure that we're up to date, to know all the current evidence-based practices so that we are creating a safe and welcoming environment for all individuals, regardless of their backgrounds, regardless of where they're coming from. And then that professional development also provides awareness to ourselves, because I know when I first started with counseling my master's program, my first goal was I want to do equine therapy. I want to work with children. And then when I was done, I was like, I don't want to do any of that. You know, like we are constantly evolving too as therapists. Eventually now, like I love working with youth again and doing the equine therapy, but we change too, just like our clientele. Like we evolve too when we have certain clientele come that sit in front of us for support. It really allows that awareness and that awareness to know too, like, well, I can't work with this certain demographic because I'm feeling triggered. And, you know, like really paying attention to ourselves too, like wellness, burnout's really important to recognize, because if we're not recognizing that within our own system, we are not going to be of any help to those who are seeking that support from us. So again, having a code of ethics and the standards of practice, you know, in this handbook, it really offers that what I call a skeleton framework to help guide us and to help us to continue to grow and evolve, and to encourage us to be mindful in our practice, because they're, you know, like we're human beings too. You know, sometimes we make choices that becomes a little too emotional for us. And that's where that guidebook really serves as a supporting factor for us to look back and be like, hey, like maybe this is not the best decision that I'm making based on what's outlined. But again, it's really being mindful that, you know, we're human too. And a lot of us that enter this field, we just want to help. But again, it's something that's great that we have today as therapists compared to years ago where it was still evolving. So again, thank you for that question.
Thank you, Lacey. A lot of good information, both personal, and I appreciate you sharing, and also just educational and informative. It is always so important and pertinent to connect knowledge to practice. So thank you so much. Jen, if you don't mind, the third question I would hand over to you. Our caller asked, What are the common formats in clinical supervision? Sorry about that.
Thanks, Tamar. That's a great question from the caller, and I really want to tie this in with what Lacey said because it's so important to match the format to the needs of the supervisee. The Canadian Counseling and Psychotherapists Association, the Clinical Supervision Guide by Shepherd 2020, says we must consider the goals of supervision and requirements. For example, say if supervision hours are to be met at a practicum university placement, well, then we're going to have to think about the constraints there. There also could be agency constraints of where the supervision will take place, and we also need to consider costs. So from a case-by-case and group supervision, they can be more affordable. They may not be sufficient at times, though one-on-one supervision could be needed. For example, say complex cases with high-risk clients or many co-occurring diagnoses and variables may be more conducive to individual one-on-one therapy for supervision. More advanced professionals may also prefer peer support. I really liked what you said, Tamar, in our discussions about the benefits of meeting monthly online for peer supervision as an advanced counselor. That's excellent. I didn't know all the great things you shared about that before. So let's first talk about individual supervision. This format offers the chance of forming a really strong relationship, conducive to deeper sharing and examination of feelings surrounding its competence. This is the venue that I've mostly had supervision with, is individual supervision. It's great for deeper reflection, increasing self-awareness, and working on parallel processes. I really enjoyed the article by Arnaud et al. At 2017 that's in our reading list about parallel processes and how to do that in individual supervision. Detailed feedback can also be offered in individual supervision in a less threatening way than with an audience of peers. There are some limitations of individual supervision, though, like I said, with cost and time constraints, high use of resources, and supervisees withholding information to please the supervisor, especially in cases where the supervisor is grading them. In our small area, there's constraints because we don't have anyone qualified to do supervision. We have 27 counselors and only 3 or 4 of them have post-high school education. And so we often meet just as a counselor cafe and just bounce things off each other and provide support. And they really help, Lacey, with the burnout and the things that you mentioned about our own self-care that keep us more ethical, as due to our ethical requirements from the CCPA. Shepherd et al. In 2016 also talked about a halo effect. Now, in individual supervision, sometimes the observer's biases can affect supervision, especially if the supervisor sees the supervisee as similar to themselves. And interestingly enough, racial similarities can increase favorable evaluations, even not based on actual performance. So this is a place where the racial tensions can actually be very counterproductive to helping the client. Didactic, triactic, and group supervision offers the benefits of supervisors being able to see the parallel process. We can see how supervisee relates to others within the group, and that can give us insight into how they respond with clients sometimes. Group supervision offers even more opportunities for vicarious learning within a safe space. Supervisors may take a more collaborative stance when working within a group. Supervisors may also need to manage relational issues between peers, and some supervisees may need to be encouraged to take part because sometimes it's just easier to sit back and observe within the group format. Delivery can be done in lots of ways. We have face-to-face, video, phone, and live observation, video recording, role play, and written reflection. I'm mostly interested in this article I found by DiStefano et al. In 2014. He did a great study on doctoral students' experiences in supervision, which I thought was perfect for us being doctoral students in supervision. They identified 5 categories of main interest. Number 1, group supervision did facilitate professional development, and they have the research on it, and that was great. The second benefits were that didactic learning was increased when experiential learning element was added. Clinical training had a cascade effect. The competence of the supervisees and supervisors all affected the system for training, resulting in more effective counseling, which would then benefit the client. Practical learning had the most benefits in skills development, which is great because you all know from our discussions that I just love the practical side of everything and how to apply all this. Also, the role of supervisor. Initially, in the study, the supervisors were tasked with dealing with the feelings of the supervisee, for example, like insecurity and anxiety about practicing. But as they progressed, the supervisor switched to focus on interventions and then the deeper parallel processes. So I got curious about what all this parallel processes is and how do we address this in the individual format? How do we choose which format to use to look deeper at parallel processes? Well, Arnaud et al. In 2017 said it's really important to discover the parallel processes in supervision. So this has been controversial. Historically, supervisors actually counseled and supervised the same student to access information about countertransference. And then around 2003, it was clear that the dual relations were causing unethical issues, especially if the supervisee was attaining therapy and being graded by the same person. So when I did my master's placement here with Yorkville University, my supervisor was brand new. She'd never supervised. And we were in a hospital setting. She was so afraid to look like she was counseling me because it was majorly considered unethical. And the emphasis was on that when she went to Athabasca University, that she totally avoided anything to do with my style, my skills, or any transference. And it actually resulted in an overcompensation that made her unable to consider anything personal, and it actually did harm. So now it's great because the recent literature is looking at many models that are incorporating parallel processes and transference as a more moderate and realistic view. Supervisors need to balance exploring transference without providing counseling to explore relational themes and bidirectional processes. And there's also a parallel process in supervision where the helper becomes the seeker. And that can be examined once the relationship is really strong. And that can be during individual format of supervision. So another limit they found in the DiStefano research was in groups, subjects had difficulty sharing and reportedly felt an awkwardness and a rigidity due to defensiveness. And that caused a lot of problems and conflicts. But those did subside over time. And on a positive side, they found that when the group focused on practical skills, the participants had to learn in a very public way, leaving them exposed. But eventually, the counselors did become more open to share their feelings. And as openness increased, so did attentiveness and learning. Thanks so much, Tamar, for that great question from the caller.
Thank you, Jen, for this very thorough answer. I really appreciate it. And I love it how you connected it to some of us, your colleagues, in the answer. So thank you so much. And for the last but not least caller, if you guys don't mind, I would like to be the one answering this question. I really find it intriguing and very, I could connect to it in my private practice as well. The caller asked, should supervision in Canada adopt one dominant model, or is an integrative approach would be more effective? So clinical supervision is fundamental to cultivating proficient, ethical, and successful practitioners. In Canada, supervision is influenced by both professional groups, such as the Canadian Counseling and Psychotherapy Association, and regulatory agencies, such as the College of Registered Psychotherapists of Ontario. A critical inquiry is whether supervision needs to embrace a single predominant model for uniformity, or whether integrative approach utilizing several models proves to be more efficiency. Sorry. I contend that an integrated competency-based methodology is most appropriate for Canada's varied cultural, clinical, and institutional environment. At a first glance, the existence of a single dominant model may seem attractive. It might provide a uniformity across training programs, give the supervisees explicit expectation, and eliminate uncertainties. If all supervisors were educated in the developmental paradigm, supervisees would understand the growth standards, and institutions could readily assess progress. Uniformity facilitates accrediting procedures and diminishes dispute around standards. So at a first glance, that seems to be something really helpful, to make sure that we all provide the same services to our clients. However, this method has several significant limitations. It poses a danger of rigidity, neglecting to accommodate the intricate and diverse realities of Canadian counseling practice. Supervisees exhibit diverse requirements, experiences levels, and cultural background. Clients offer a broad spectrum of concern, and venues include private practices, educational institutions, hospitals, and community organizations. A solitary model is incapable of encompassing these extensive range of practices. An integrated supervision approach enables supervisors to utilize various theories and techniques while adhering to ethical and competency-based standards. Shepard's 2020 asserts that Canadian supervision flourishes when supervisors exhibit flexibility, responsiveness, and the capacity to integrate developmental, discriminatory, systemic, and relational models. Beginner supervisees may benefit from developmental scaffolding, while experienced practitioners may need a more collaborative and reflective interaction. A discrimination model enables supervisors to adopt their roles, become teacher, consultant, or counselor according to the immediate requirements of the supervisee. Simultaneously, systemic or relational model guarantees that supervision is attuned to cultural diversity, power relations, and the societal and the social environment surrounding both the supervisees and the clients. Canadian regulations are well aligned with integration. The CLPO's Clinical Supervision Guide 2025 does not stipulate a specific model, but mandates that supervisors exhibit competence, formulating agreement, and meticulously record supervision. This emphasizes that the priority is not loyal to a single paradigm, but rather the capacity to advocate for safe, effective, and ethical practices. Flander and Scheffrank's 2017 asserts that competency-based supervision inherently facilitates integration, as competencies can be developed through various supervisory frameworks. In a cosmopolitan nation such as Canada, no single framework adequately resolves problems of cultural identity, structural oppression, or indigenous perspectives. Integrative supervision facilitates cultural humility, trauma-informed practices, and attentiveness to the variety of clients and supervisees. This attentiveness enhances the growth of supervisees and the result of client care. I think all of you as well have shared the diversity within your own clients showing how these different models are necessary to be more culturally diverse. Myself, being a practitioner who practice in 2 different languages, as well working with many cultural within my close community as well as a larger community, I find that it's so important for me to really bring to the session the different culture, the different perspective, the different models that really will benefit my clients. And I think the same is true as a supervisor, to really adhere to what my supervisees needs are with their cultural background, with their personal experiences, to really benefit them the most and help them in their growth. So nonetheless, the integration should not imply to a lack of standards, just to make it sure. Shepard et al. 2016 warned that supervisor must be deliberate and honest about their decision. I think you spoke about it, Jen, even with your own struggle, as well as you, Lacey, at the end of your answer. Thank you. An unstructural integrative approach may perplex supervisees or lead to inconsistencies. Supervisor must clearly describe their framework, align their techniques with learning objective, and assess supervisees' development in relations to skills. A single dominating paradigm might provide uniformity, although it possesses a danger of rigidity and fails to present the variety of Canadian practices. A comprehensive, competency-oriented methodology rooted in ethical standards, supervision agreement, and defined competencies enhances supervisors' ability to address the requirement of supervisees, clients, and regulatory entities. According to Shepard 2020, Canadian supervision is most successful when it harmonizes flexibility with structure and integration with intentionality. Ultimately, integration involves not discarding models, but rather interlacing them judiciously to create proficient, ethical, and cultural attuned practitioners. Thank you so much for the callers. Sorry. So thank you for all our callers for such interesting questions. And before we say our finals goodbye, I would love to hear from each one of you, Linda, Jen, and Lacey, I would love to hear from you each. What is the most important takeaway about supervision models in Canada counseling that you can share with our callers today? Linda?
I'm struck reflecting on this experience, just being here. Jen and Lacey and Tamar, each of the stories and each of the questions was different, but the interdisciplinary aspect of what we're doing through the filter of a structure, through the filter of, being ethical practitioners at a minimum of a master's level that we bring to this, and you bringing into you being able to even discuss this is very powerful. Just being right here in the moment. We each bring our own power to the table, and we just hope that we can plug in, if I can use that analogy, our supervisees so that they can carry on, because the imprint goes on and on. And Tamar, your effort in putting this all together hasn't gone unnoticed as anybody who will watch this. It was very good, and it was a great experience what you gave us here. And, being able to co-facilitate was a very powerful moment for me too. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Linda. It has been such a pleasure to be a part of this circle. I really felt that this was integrative and it was wonderful. Thank you so much. Jen, would you like to share your final reflection with us and our callers?
Sure. Wow, this has been so helpful. Where should I start? I think that as I progressed as a therapist, I really have begun to be more integrative, not just of frameworks, but of tools. I choose and pick here and there what my individual clients need to really offer holistic therapy. I think as a supervisor, I really want to do the same. I really like Dr. Russell Chapman's Micro Training Associates 2017 this week. The videos were great. I really liked how she chose the model based on the supervision question. I want to try to do that too. Also, our choice in supervision formats doesn't need to be either or decision. At different times of our career, we can pick and choose as we need. I want to try peer supervision like you're doing, Tamar, and I think the individual is really great for the deeper work as well. There will be times when each format is necessary and conducive to the learning. So thank you so much, Tamar, for all you did. And Lacey and Linda, this was a great experience.
Thank you, Jen. It's always so nice to share. And I agree with you, like the peer supervision that I've been working with for a few years now has been so helpful. You know, just for a burnout, like Lacey was saying, just sometimes to ask about different clients and, you know, different ideas when we're stuck. I do. I would share that I find it very, very helpful. Thank you. Lacey, would you mind sharing your last reflection with us?
Sure. I think the great thing too, like I've said earlier, that the field of mental health has evolved so much. And the great thing is, me being a supervisor, even with my current role as a director, that I want to hire people or work with people that are better than me, because eventually I want them to take over what I'm doing so that I can move on. And I think that's the one thing being a supervisor, that our role is not to dictate or tell an individual what they're doing wrong, but to empower them, to encourage them, to be their authentic self. Because I know when I was doing my practicum and the way I learned in my master's program in the classroom, I had this thought that therapy was like looking through that mirror and then observing, and then it's just straight like talk therapy, like that's how I always thought of therapy. But then doing it, like I learned from an Indigenous therapist, and she specialized in complex trauma, and just learning from her really allowed me to feel empowered and confident with what I'm doing, especially as a lived individual from a second generation of residential school and a survivor of complex trauma, but now in a field where I can utilize that lived experience with the education and combine it in one. And it's like that social learning theory that I really learned from my supervisor, is to be your authentic self. And that's one thing I always share within my team when doing presentations or anything like that, is like, be your authentic self. Like, don't be so scripted. Don't be this robot, because the people know, like your clientele will know. Sometimes it's just even sharing a little bit about yourself. And, with the various models of supervision, like I really appreciate the multicultural model, because I feel that that's something that's new, but still not practiced enough. Again, just from a personal standpoint, because within Canada, there's so much individuals from diverse backgrounds, and it's our job to ensure that we're practicing from a culturally relevant practice that respects those who seek us out. Because I always share too, within Indigenous populations, we're not all the same. We've experienced colonial assimilation practices very differently. The East Coast, then the West Coast, then the Plains, like it's not all the same. There's very different experiences. And then I always tell them, like, just ask questions. That's the best thing you can do, is just ask. Like, it's just being a human being. So it's really encouraging our supervisees, to empower, to better them, to help guide them to make those ethical decisions that also promotes them to be their authentic self when they leave us, because we want to, it's like being a mother hen, you want them to flourish without you. And that's how I always see it, like the day they don't need us is the knowing that we did our job right as supervisors. So thank you.
Thank you, Lacey. I must say, even in your final gems, there were two things that you said that really touched me. I mean, to share with our callers and our viewers, one of the things that you said just before we started recording was be your authentic self. And that really actually meant a lot to me. It kind of like put me at ease as we record. So thank you for that. And the last thing that you also said just a minute ago, I can really relate to personally, and makes me so happy to hear when you said, like, I want to be a supervisor that makes their supervisee even better. I think I shared with some of our classmates that wasn't my first supervisee experience, and my supervisor did not act under that philosophy of life or supervisor's philosophy. So I really appreciate that. And I truly hope that all supervisors will feel like you. So thank you so much. So thank you, Linda, Jen, and Lacey. What great insight
Yeah.
we shared with our viewers today. As we wrap up Models That Matters, we hope today's discussion has highlighted not only the diversity of supervision models, but also the importance of integrating approaches that truly fits the needs of supervisees and clients. Thank you again, Linda, Jen, and Lacey, for sharing your insights, and to all of you for joining us in this conversation. Remember, models matters most when they are applied with intention, flexibility, and heart. We encourage you to take these ideas forward into your own practice and keep the dialogue alive behind today. Thank you very much for joining us. Have a great day.
Yes, hello everyone. Just before we let you go, we would like to further engage you in 2 reflection activities and a quick knowledge check. And this is just for fun and is meant to launch our discussions this up and coming week. And you have our full attention. Linda, Tamar, Jen, and Lacey are going to respond to you responding to us. So let's get this started. We'll explain it. Reflection activity 1, application to practice. From the supervision models discussed, we only discussed the developmental model, the integrative, the competency-based, and the discrimination model. Outside of these models, also, please comment and bring them into play next week. Which one do you see yourself benefiting from the most as a supervisee? In other words, now that you are aware as a supervisor, which one would you express interest in with your supervisor and why? We're looking for just a short reflection, 3 to 4 sentences, connecting one of the models to a real hypothetical situation in your practice. Even if it's a real situation in your practice, this is what we learn from. We learn to see how different we handle these things within our own practice so that we know. Activity 2, ethics and cultural responsiveness. The video that we put together highlighted how Canadian supervision is shaped by multiculturalism and Indigenous perspectives, specifically. So how can supervisors balance respecting cultural practices with adhering to professional ethics when dilemmas arise? So what we're asking for are examples that we can share that are real. And if you could tell it to us in a story or a short narrative of a scenario where you have recently had a cultural value or ethical guideline appear to create tension with your supervisee or your supervisor, depending which role you were in, and debrief us on the approach used. In other words, how did that go for you? And how did you release that tension? Or are you still holding the tension today? We would love to hear that. And lastly, we thought we would do a quick pop quiz or a knowledge check. And we put together 3 perspectives. First one, which supervision model emphasizes supervisees moving through developmental stages of competence? And the third one, what are the 3 roles in Bernard's discrimination model? And why is competency-based supervision gaining traction in Canada today? Here's something even more interesting. We would love to hear the answer to these questions individually and then review them together to confirm learning next week in the posts. Or you can go through your head and you can go through and figure out what the answers are now, which kind of put us in a bit of a bind because we're like, oh, you know what? Do we hold back or do we present the actual answers here so people can just know what's going on? So we thought we'd give you an option. If you're going to close this without seeing the answers on the next slide, yeah, we're going to show you the answers on the next slide. You can just stop the video here, in which case we're going to say, love you, we're on, we're going to see you next week, and we're really looking forward to this. And we had a whole lot of fun doing this with you. But if you hang on, we are going to give you the answers to these on the next slide. Okay. Are you ready? Where's she on? Oh, joking. Only joking. No, really, here are the answers. Okay. Here they are. Okay. So that is the end, and we really had fun presenting this to you. Thank you. Bye from all of us.